Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Kinky Wellness Podcast. Today, I'm excited to welcome back Somatic Pleasure Coach James Humecky. James was previously on the show in episode 183, where he introduced us to Pleasure Somatics 101. However, today, James is back to discuss the concept of global consciousness and what that means for society, our sexuality, and our overall well being. So without further ado, let's welcome James back to the show and jump right into this thought-provoking conversation. Hey, welcome back to the show, James. How you doing today?
I am doing fantastic actually today. I'm really excited about talking to you.
I'm
I even,
excited
I even
too.
prepared myself.
Well, today we're going to be talking about consciousness and themes that you have with global consciousness. And just to really jump right into it, I kind of want to define and the key characteristics of what consciousness is.
hmm So one of my favorite definitions of consciousness comes from Moshe Feldenkrais, and he just says it very simply. He says consciousness is kinesthetic awareness. So what that means is body awareness, sensation awareness, and going into that inside so that you know what you're feeling. So in a way you're kind of separating emotion and story, right? And you're just going right into what's happening in the body. And that might feel very kind of scientific and dry and limiting, but the way that I look at it and the way that Feldenkrais looked at it, and this is, if you look at some of the older traditions, this is kind of what they're talking about, right? You have to go in to be able to get out, or to be able to really touch God, you have to go in. This is like that personal relationship, right? You're touching into your intuition, you're touching into the millions and millions and millions of bits of information that are coming in and through and being processed in your body at any given second. So when you take it beyond, like, oh, my stomach hurts or my heart is beating, I can regulate my breathing. These are very important. These are basic tools. These are the way places you want to go. But when you keep drilling down, you begin to not just you begin to go past the intellectual understanding of interconnectedness, and you begin to actually get a visceral experience of it. So then let's just take breathing, for instance. You begin to breathe, you bring that awareness in of where that breath is coming from, where the air is coming from, how it's produced, the trees, the plants outside, the other people and animals that have breathed this same air. Is breathe the right word? Breathe this same air over millions and millions of years. I mean, we're basically kind of recirculating the same molecules over and over again. So just that one simple kind of exercise and awareness, going in, being aware of a basic process, breath, you can begin to extrapolate that into the understanding of how we are all interconnected. And what that does is it actually opens up our perception, your perception of what's happening in the world. So, just do a quick jump over into global consciousness. When you can feel yourself connected that deeply and that deep of an understanding, that visceral kinesthetic understanding, it's not, well, it's just a short hop into realizing how interconnected you and I are, and how important that interconnection is, and how my actions affect you and everybody else around, well, basically on the planet, or the whole butterfly effect thing. So hopefully that's not too convoluted, but that's my basic understanding and philosophy around consciousness, is starting with the basic processes in our bodies and understanding the the miracle of how that works, and how it can't work alone. You have to have everything else around you, people, the environment, in order to be alive, basically.
And really, the big part of that, of what I feel like what I could interpret is the presentness that you need at that moment. And really just, even feeling how do your clothes feel on your skin. And sometimes we overlook these. And maybe I'm guilty, but when a sweater is done past that comfiness and it starts to irritate my skin, like, no.
Well, and this kind of coming back to, the let's just talk about it for a second, like in the kink and BDSM world, right? There's that one of the, oh gosh, this goes so many different ways. But in that global consciousness and the understanding of our interconnectedness and the possibility of making some changes in the world, right?
Mm.
This is one of the questions you actually asked me earlier. And one of the tenets of in kink and BDSM is don't yuck somebody's yum. So if you take that and roll that back a little bit, right? It means like you're just talking about your sweater and how it feels on your body and how you are experiencing that material at that moment, right? Somebody else can use the same material, be in basically the same environment and be like, ooh, that doesn't feel good on my body. Or like, oh my God, I just, this sweater that I've had for 20 years and I just, just feels so good. And that could be tied into emotional things like who gave it to them and where they got it and the color and, how old they were and what team they were playing on or whatever it is, so it can have that is consciousness, that is consciousness, right? And so that, yeah, don't yuck somebody's yum. I mean, if we could do that in the world right now, I mean, wouldn't that take care of like a huge majority of the issues that are happening around the world? Like, hey, you like to worship like that, great, just
Mm,
get consent, negotiate, and don't hurt somebody unless they really want you to.
mm,
In that same vein, right, is being willing to experiment with a variety of things, but knowing that you can experiment with that in a container where your boundaries aren't necessarily going to be crossed, or that you have the capacity and the ability to say no
mm,
and stop something, like in a scene, but in the world too, we're not really taught necessarily how to do that in most of our cultures. And, we're not taught that it's okay to say no, that it's okay to speak up for what you want, that it's actually okay to know your desires and ask for those things. So to me, that's another piece of the consciousness. And that's another piece that when we're playing in these other cultures, fields, environments, we get to actually get a visceral, real-time experience and practice in those things that can be taken out into the general world.
And when we're moving into the general world, so what does your concept of the global consciousness shift thinking mean?
So to me, the global consciousness shift thinking, like I said, it's a little bit hard to define because no matter what perspective I come from, there's going to be other people's perspectives. So that's one of the first tenets, right? Is understanding that there are a wide variety of perspectives on any given situation or what needs to be done in the world, right? Continuing to be curious and ask the questions to find out where the commonalities are. So that would be like one of the first things that would to me would be a huge global consciousness shift, right? It's like seemingly completely opposing views, camps, I mean, look at our elections right now, you know what I mean? But what are the commonalities? And let's talk about that, right? Let's talk about what we all really are looking for, and in the world, basically, you could go to back to Maslow's,
Higher,
hierarchies, right?
yeah.
Yeah. And those basic things, we want to be able to feed ourselves. We want to be relatively safe, then going on up and up, we want to be able to have access to resources. We want to be able to take care of our families, and up a little bit more, we want to be able to just have joy and create, art and, whatever it is, make love in the sun and not have to worry about it. So we're all looking for that place where we can just kind of like sink in and feel okay and feel
Mm.
supported, right? How to get there and whose version of that is right. That's where we get into all of these conflicts, right? So my one of my main tenets on that would be to continue to be curious and find out where the commonalities are in all of our desires.
And that just takes a lot of, I believe it takes patience because sometimes we have to sit patiently and wait for someone to explain their side or their story and also just be open. And we live in a society that's so fast that I feel like even patience, like you got to really take that back.
Hmm. Yeah, slowing down and learning how to listen.
Mm,
Like, here's a good tenant: shut your fucking mouth. Like listen to something. Like listen to what that other person is saying.
mm,
As a therapist, as a coach, there's there's this balance between teaching and guiding and listening, right? And I will err on the side of teaching and guiding, because I know and my perspective and all of that kind of stuff. So, I get these constant reminders of slowing down or even just stopping, just shutting my mouth and listening to the other person, asking questions that are curiosity questions,
mm.
that are, things like labeling and mirroring, it seems like, it sounds like, in that process, a way of validating what the other person is feeling, what's going on inside them, as opposed, and that doesn't mean you necessarily validate their actions or behaviors or that you agree or anything, so empathy, listening, right, being curious. And again, we don't have a lot of training for that in general, you know that we do live in a culture where get louder, get faster, get more aggressive. These are the things that are seemingly things that make you successful in this particular paradigm that we're living in right now.
Well, you mentioned behavior, and first thing that came to mind as well is when you do take that chance to slow down, you can recognize some of your unconscious behavior in the form of habits and, what is your knee-jerk reaction to do. And I think that, and it ties into emotions. I remember I used to be a nail biter, and it wasn't until I was like, wait, what am I doing? And really just being present in that moment to stop some of that unconscious behavior.
Yeah, and it does take, this is another thing around the consciousness shift that you were asking about, is that we each need to take responsibility for our part in that, our
Mm-hmm.
own person. So you said nail biting. Well, nobody out there is going to change that for you. Now, you might have to change some of the things out there. You might have to shift your environment. You might have to be aware of the triggers, the people you're around, what makes you want to do that, what hits you that way. That's an important part of it. But in the end, you're the only one that can change that. And the best thing that I can do is be an example. So like being real, like this is another part, right? Is like just be real, like be real, like what, I'm having a hard time, or I'm having a great time, or these are the sensations that are happening in my body, and this is what seems to be triggering those reactions in my body, whether it's negative or positive, right? And then being able to discern what actions you need to take, what directions you need to go, what environment you need to put yourself in, your limits and your boundaries, you know?
I agree with all of these points. And as you go through it, sometimes at the beginning, when you're shifting from that awake but not really awake to consciousness, it's a journey. Like that I think can be quite painful. Like you might have to make some really big decisions. And I think that's something that It's just part of the journey as well.
Yeah, I like to tell people that healing doesn't have to hurt. And starting people in a place where, begin to get that message that they're not broken, right? That whatever they're doing, whether it's some kind of an addictive behavior or self-sabotage, or if it's, like not being able to navigate their relationship, or, getting sick, or whatever is going on with them, right? Isn't a moral issue, and it isn't a place where you are intrinsically broken, right? So starting out from your perfect whole and complete is one, that sounds very new agey, I know, but it's basically those things that are happening, and this includes addictions, or the behaviors, the anxiety and stuff like that. Is your body reacting to an environmental stimulus based on a perspective that was programmed, let's say, from some experiences? And programmed is kind of a, problematic word, but when we're children, we don't have the choice of our environment, right? We don't have the choice of the behaviors of those around us, like removing ourselves from that place. We don't have enough experience to be able to compare, like, what really works for us to, like, this really doesn't work for me, right? So we just have to kind of like accept, and we're, in that way, that's the conditioning, right?
Mhm.
So if you have a negative environment or a negative experiences, especially as you're growing up, before you hit that real cognitive stage, there's these patterns get set into your body, right? But it's your body and your mind really wanting to keep you safe. It's your body and mind doing everything it can to keep you from dying, to help make sure that you are fed, to do whatever it can to mitigate not having close, loving touch, or having a lot of close touch that's not healthy, you know?
Mm.
So all of those things happen. And so when and if somebody gets to the stage where they recognize all of that, and they begin to want to unwind all of that, one of the things you have to know is that, yes, there is going to be some hard times, right? Because that stuff is like, those grooves are deep a lot of times. And, you can take that and extrapolate that out into the global situation, and you recognize that there's a huge amount of conditioned trauma throughout the world, in every culture. Every single one of us came from a place in somewhere in our past where we were subjugated, we were enslaved, we were killed, we were, whatever, driven off our land, whatever it is. Every single one of us, it's just right now we have some more current examples of this, happening all over the world, right? But in the collective consciousness, we have that in our epigenetic DNA strains, right? That's part of who we are. And in some ways, I kind of see the world, well, suffering from that and just being super reactive to all of that, On a personal level, this is one of the consciousness things. Like, we have to be able to see all of that on a personal level and take responsibility for what's happening in ourselves and make those changes within ourselves, right? This is the best way that I can say that we're going to be able to affect a global consciousness shift, because the whole world, in my opinion, is suffering from just a major crisis, suffering from, thousands of years of trauma in many ways, right? Now, see, here's the other thing too, is like, if you take that piece where I said, you're not broken, and I know I'm talking a lot right now, so feel free to interrupt me, but, if you take that piece where you're not broken, the world isn't broken either, right?
Mm.
Everything is working exactly the way it's supposed to work. And it's reacting in, the earth, if you will, or just the whole global environment is reacting in a way that is trying to preserve itself, you know. And some of those ways of doing that because of bad programming are very destructive, right? It's like I'll if you don't mind, I'll just use the nail biting thing, right? It's like that's a way of self-soothing, right? Oh,
Hmm.
like having a blankie, sucking your thumb, whatever it is, all the way into like shooting heroin, right? It's like these are just ways of like, God damn, this world, this life, whatever's happening, and I don't know how to do it. I don't know what's going on. I don't know have the tools. So my body is going to do what it needs to do to try to like at least, tamp it down a little bit. I mean, as far as analogies go, right? Which are always limited, but that's kind of what's happening in the world. It just feels like that. It's just like, Jesus, there's just been so much history, and
Mm.
the whole world is feeling the weight of that. And then instead of stopping, slowing down, and listening, well, let's build some more technology and let's shoot stuff into the atmosphere and let's I don't know, throw a bunch of chemicals on the ground, and try to grow more food, and let's keep procreate. I'm not a person that actually has a huge issue with like overpopulation and stuff. I don't think that's the issue, but
No, neither
but
do
there
I.
are
Yeah.
8 billion people on the planet, and we are all in instantaneous communication. And that
Mm.
is just overwhelming for our nervous systems on our level.
Well, that's the choices. Like choices are overwhelming on everything. And I do agree to this. I was looking at some people who had just gotten out of prison for a while, and some of the problems of the overwhelm just picking out what type of drink to have. And I don't think that people realize that having access to everything actually limits what we can do. We feel overwhelmed.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, what are some of the other key foundations that are trying to get people to acknowledge their consciousness or ways to work with deepening that with them within themselves?
So I'm a somatic practitioner, a somatic therapist, educator. So and somatics, right, is kind of a right now it's a little bit of a catchphrase. I know that. I understand that. And if you look back into the origins of the word, it just meant the whole body or body, right? And it was more general than it is what the way we're using it. But the way that it's come to be used more now, and the way that I use it, right, is that understanding, like I was saying, like that kinesthetic awareness, but that deep, visceral understanding of what's happening in the whole system. So, instead of a bunch of parts, you have one organic ecosystem, let's call it, right? And then taking that out, that organic ecosystem is part of this larger organic ecosystem, the earth and the air and other people, community, environment, right? Um, but to get to that visceral understanding, you can't just intellectualize it. You can't just, read about it. You have to practice it. So breath is one of those things, right? Breath is a fundamental movement in the body because you're, moving the body. Obviously, you can't go very long without breathing, so it's fundamental to life. But it is also one of the easiest and most direct accesses to, well, you can regulate it, right? It's one of the easiest functions in the body to regulate on your own consciously, right? So you can adjust it and you can use it in different ways. And part of that is to use it to feel deeply or deeper into the body what's going on. And when I say feel, I'm talking about sensations, not emotions. Okay. Talking about temperature, pressure, weight, things like tingling and, butterflies in the stomach and, those, that's what I'm talking about. When I say feeling, I'm talking about sensation. So breath can heighten different sensations in the body. It can bring different sensations down, right? And it can expand your awareness into parts of your body that you may not consciously be aware of all the time. And you're breathing a certain way, and you feel that, they call it tetany, but you feel that shooting out to your fingertips and your toes, and your body shaking. You're feeling stuff,
Hmm.
And then movement, and it's not just like, yeah, go out and run or jump on your bike or do yoga. Yoga is actually meant to do this, exactly what I'm talking about. The yoga we're talking about, the hatha, the movement part of yoga, right, is meant to bring awareness into your body, because you slow down enough to begin to articulate and move, and then hold in these different things and use your breath
Hmm.
to create more awareness of what's happening in your body. Now, super important in my book is to don't go into all the super spiritual, new agey, like, the nectar is running down the back of your throat. I mean, that's all lovely. It's all lovely. It really is. And I don't mean to degrade it. What I'm saying is, like, just get into your body. Like, just,
Yeah.
let's get practical here. You're not going to see God. It might feel like that, but you're not, that's not what it's about. It's about understanding this body as an intrinsic whole, and as a whole within a whole, right? Like,
Mhm.
right? Like the micro and macro. So then, movement and practicing every kind of movement you can, like, get novel, like, learn how to roll around, crawling, rolling, jumping, the basics, get into the baby movements, and do go ecstatic dance. I mean, I have spent a good portion of my life just exploring all the different things. I, you know climbing trees and doing aerial dancing with, rappel ropes, and, swimming in with the whales in Hawaii. I mean, just, those things that are, how wonderful this body and how many different ways it can move. Just a little factoid, right? When we're babies, we have something like 3,500 different movements that are available to us. And they've shown that, like, by the time most people hit graduate high school, it's down to about 500. And
Oh, wow.
it's not because we can't do it, it's because we get ingrained in certain ways of moving
Well,
and
dance,
lose our abilities, right?
I agree. Dancing is so underrated. I don't think people really understand on a global level how important dance can be.
Well, and like with anything, I mean, every culture has their dances. Every single culture in the world has their dances, and what happens is that they become kind of dogmatized and like ritualized, right? Which is
Mhm.
fine. I don't have any problem with that. But when I was over in, dare I say, I was in Palestine a few years ago working with a non-violence movement group there. And I have some video, and we're just, we're drinking and having fun and doing these dances, and it wasn't ritualized at all. It was just, but also they had their way of doing it. You know what I mean? So, that's the other thing, is like, seek out these different ways, do salsa dancing, go learn ballroom, and, go to contact improv and ecstatic dance. And yeah, when I was early on in this in this process for myself after my first divorce in 1993. And I just made a complete turnaround from, like, total yuppie, young, upwardly mobile entrepreneur. All my friends were da 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 da, we had houses and all that stuff. And I got rid of everything in my business, and I moved to Northern California, and I pierced my ears, I grew my hair, and I ran around in bare feet and holy jeans for like 2 years, right? Had a little beach cruiser bike. But, and I had danced my whole life, but I'd never been in kind of like this free form, like, crazy hippie dance, right? And I went to a place where there's a reggae band playing one night, and all of those old hippies up there in in Mendocino were just like, and I'm like, okay, okay, I can do this. Okay, okay, and then just started letting go and like just moving, and like I was like, hell yeah, that was great. But it took a lot to break that. I mean, I was been a mover my whole life, but to break into that kind of what's from my perspective, that unstructured kind of weird hippie da 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 da, and yeah, it was beautiful, and now I can do that without issue at all.
Yeah. Well, I understand completely my first ecstatic dance when I went to it versus what, the dancing that like what I had grown up with, like just clubs and jumping up and down, and it is pretty restricted. It's not really dancing because when I went to the ecstatic dance and it's almost like you give yourself permission because you see other people giving themselves permission, or at least that was my experience to really break out, but it's thrilling. It's thrilling.
So, I'm gonna just kind of bring this back around to what we were talking about, with the movement. One of the things is, yes, seek out novelty, move your body as many different ways as you can because your body is amazing. And beginning to tie that to what's happening in your body and learning how to express that physically. So, this is the difference between like going to a talk therapy and coming to a somatic practitioner, for instance, right? Is in talk therapy, you're just intellectualizing all of this. I'm feeling this is what's happening, da 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 da. But going back to that, that thing where, all of this information and processes are happening in your body all the time, millions and millions and millions of processes and information bits every second, right? It is a non-verbal, generally subconscious um, process, right? But you feel it. And when you begin to move with that feeling, that sensation, whether it's a tight thing, you can't really see me, you're tight or loose or whatever, and you begin to move with that and become conscious that you can actually begin to break the conditioning. So something we didn't talk about in somatic, this is not just somatics, but it's a very somatic thing, is that we have muscle memory, right? And that doesn't mean just like, I know how to throw the ball, I know how to throw the ball, I know how to throw the ball. It also means like, I got punched in the arm, and now that memory is in my fascia and in my musculature and in my nervous system, right? You can access that stuff and you can begin to unwind it because the body, again, wanting to keep you safe, will keep a reaction, oftentimes keep a reaction in your body that can, down the road lead to injuries if you're not careful, or even illness and cancer and all that other kind of stuff, right? But you can actually, without having to talk about it or without really understanding or being able to like verbalize it, you can actually move that memory. You can
Hmm.
shift that conditioning. You can reprogram your body. So then we'll just roll this back to the global consciousness thing. If people could get into their bodies that deeply and begin to unwind some of that experience, conditioning, trauma, begin to understand it, connect it with the breath, connect it with what's happening in their environment and with each other, we would see a lot more empathy and kindness, I believe. That's my feeling of it.
And when it comes to this, how do you see the role of technology then playing into this with the rise of it?
Ah. Well, okay. I really this was a little bit of a leap for me. I'm not a Luddite. I mean, I've been working on online for years. I'm not working online, but I've had my website up and I've been, the social media and stuff. So I'm not opposed to that in necessarily, but it is a double-edged sword. So what I've taken I'll just give my own personal story, and I have finally broken through to allowing myself to take my work online, because I've always felt like my work is just so in person and I have to be right there and touch them and yada yada yada, and just finding those places that can actually be, the knowledge and the skills and whatnot that actually can be imparted online, and then doing that. So, it expands the audience. It allows me to, work with people that are not anywhere near me, in my vicinity. And like I said, it gives me a wider reach, a more global reach. And so in that way, it's amazing, right? And it's just absolutely amazing. And you're seeing it all over the place. Um, you know, if you can not just be dragged in by the algorithm and like actually make choices, which you actually can. you know, yeah, there's a ton of people out there that are doing really good work. So you get to connect with all of these people all over the world. I mean, half my community, more than half my community, is global, like international. I mean, I don't have like a town community per se. So yeah, that's beautiful. In one day I can be talking to somebody in Germany and then be talking to somebody in, Thailand, or down in Central America. It's just, or yeah, Canada. It's pretty awesome. So this is the beauty of it. And again, I think I would come back to the same idea where if people are not embodied and really feeling into what's going on, the it's so easy to get pulled into the dark side of that, the doom
Mm.
scrolling. Dude, I do it. I'm not innocent here. I will like, oh Jesus, I've been on here for 30 minutes. What am I doing? Not looking at anything. So, it's a constant awareness, because it is a really, really strong draw to our minds, right? So yeah, I think it's a beautiful tool when used properly. It's just like anything else, a sharp knife. You don't want to give one to a 3-year-old.
Absolutely.
You definitely want one when you're carving your
Yeah.
turkey.
So when it comes to global consciousness, what are you hoping for with your work and where do you see it going in the future?
This work for me really started consciously back in the early 90s, right? When I started studying sociology and I started studying international relations and public speaking. And then I traveled and worked internationally for quite a while. And, there was initially this like, gotta tear it all down. I mean, this thing is terrible. Oh my God, and like, the anxiety feeling and the anger and the feeling that the whole structure needed to be wiped away and something new had to come in, right? And as I grew in the consciousness of what's happening in the world, what's happening in my body, the somatics, and learning how to decondition myself, let's say, or like put new, more healthy programming and messages into myself. Um, well, the frustration has diminished extensively, right? Around like, oh my God, everything's happening and we're never going to make it out of here. And as I bring that work more into a personal level, right? That whole thing, Gandhi, be the change you wish to see. Or, yeah, there's other things they could use references from the Bible and stuff, that there's a lot of reference to like, you can't change anything out there unless you are willing and able to do it in yourself.
Hmm.
So that's what my work is about, right? And it was very focused on these more like, I don't want to say normal, but these more vanilla issues. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
But something else. Anyway, it was more focused on like, just how do you do a relationship, and how do you navigate family, and how do you work in the world and whatnot, right? And so I did that work for a long time, and I still do that. It's still a foundation to my work. Like, look, You're not broken. I said it already once. Let's find out what's happening inside, what those reactions are, and what you need to do to be able to navigate and shift your inner state, right? Shifting your own inner state so that you can ride the vicissitudes or the ups and downs of life that happen all the time, that are always going to happen no matter how perfect of a world we have, right? Baseline, that's the baseline, right? And in that process of learning and growing in this, in my own self and in my practice, one of the final barriers that I've come up against is sexuality, and people, opening up maybe through, the 60s revolution and all of these other kinds of things, and the human potential movement and what's happening around the world, so we can talk about things and meditation and yada yada yada. And but it comes down to this really deep pelvic girdle life force place where there's still like this, right? And I also feel like that's happening around the world. I really do. Like we're afraid of our primal creative sensual natures, right? And so we'll get to a certain point of connection and understanding and openness, but then there's like that last barrier. So this is also what is driving my work now, is to do that work for myself, like make sure that I'm not shut off to that full potentiality of my creative sensual nature, and help other people get to that place. So I envision a world basically where you know nobody's yucking anybody's yum. We're all being able to like tap into that primal nature without any shame, without shutting ourselves down, those barriers and those limitations that we self-impose, and that we can interact on this level and understand intimacy beyond penetrative sex, right? Understand creativity as a sensual part of our beingness. Understand sensuality means just feeling what is really happening around us, and connecting, and just like loving the juiciness of it, even the shitty stuff. You know what I mean? Like, because shitty stuff is going to happen. It's always going to happen, right? People are going to die. There's going to be natural disasters. There's just going to be stuff that happens. And like, I wrote something the other day about grief, and it's like, grief is one of those things that it's not a process that you just do one time and you get over it. Your mom dies, or, a loved one, whatever it is, loss of a relationship. You don't just, that is in our bodies. That's the other thing too, is everything's in our bodies and it doesn't go away. It just integrates. So, but these things give texture and color to our lives. And if we can not shut it down, not be afraid of it, like unshame and unchain the depth of this sensation connection in the world, more empathy is going to happen. If I dare say it, more love, more understanding of the other, and yeah, less draw to committing violence to each other.
Mm-hmm. All of
So
that.
that's where I'm taking my work. Yeah.
Oh, sorry to cut you off. Yeah, that was all beautiful. Where can my listeners find you if they want to reach out to work with you?
Well, I do have a website. I've got a couple of them actually. But somatic-pleasure.com. Somebody else got the damn somatic pleasure.
Well, I will leave the link in the
Yeah.
description so everyone can find you. But for my
And
listeners, I will talk to you on Wednesday. And thank you again for coming on the show.
you bet. All right. Thanks, Dana. Have a great day.
Stay kinky.